So far, we've canvassed a few ideas. We've canvassed the idea that media policy is politically important because it creates certain kinds of social realities. We've talked about the way that alcohol advertising are a particularly powerful example of this process. And we've talked about the way that alcohol advertising became difficult to regulate as a part of a shift in advertising practice whereby advertising became transformational in nature. And what that meant is that advertising is difficult to regulate because it rarely makes explicit claims about what a product will or won't do for you in terms of your personality and your lifestyle and your dreams, although quite often it implies all kinds of things. And now, in the second to last video on this particular topic, what we're going to be talking about is the way that social media have made media regulation even more difficult, because, in a sense, social media create perfect advertising because alcohol advertising in and of itself actually ceases to be advertising at all. What we're doing is talking about the difficulties of regulating alcohol advertising in a situation where some of the most powerful pro drinking messages, some of the most powerful messages that glamorize and normalize drinking, don't come from the advertising industry at all, but come through user-generated content on via social media. And this is a good case study to bring us back to Livingston and Lunt, because these sorts of practices, the way that social media have become involved in promoting alcohol consumption and excessive alcohol consumption, are an object lesson in the media shift that Livingston and Lunt were describing as being so challenging for the regulatory regime. That is the shift to digital media and the shift toward treating people as rational consumers rather than citizens who deserve some kind of protection from powerful media industries. So we're going to talk about how all of those fairly abstract ideas can be explained in the context of social media messages about advertising. And I'm going to be talking a little bit also about how this particular form of communication works in the regulatory space, using Ofcom as an example. So talking about the regulatory space that Livingston and Lunt describe in this week's reading. Now, if you see the image in front of you, so what this image is for is this is an image which is taken from the Facebook site of a British student-based events company called Carnage UK. That's CARNAGE. And what Carnage is an events company that essentially, in partnership with the licensed drinks trade and also alcohol vendors, stages UK student events nights, parties, if you like, for students in most of the UK's major student cities. So not so much London, actually, but large student cities with large student populations, particularly in the north, places like Newcastle, Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, Bath on the south coast, anywhere where there are cities with large student populations. And what happens through this event is the event organisers hire usually a nightclub. They sell Carnage T-shirts, sort of commemorative T-shirts to students, and then they have them. They have them that they have students sort of proceed from through a number of bars. It's also associated with chain alcohol outlets such as Revolution vodka bars and Walkabout, themed Australian pubs. And it's been very controversial in the United Kingdom because this event is quite often associated with very excessive drinking. And the thing that you see here is, of course, we see these are the pictures that you see in front of you are images of young women students. And as you can see, how can I put it? They're fairly scantily dressed. And one of the things that Carnage is criticized for is encouraging women, in particular, to dress very scantily. It doesn't really encourage men to dress in any particular way, but it does quite often hold events that encourage women to dress skimpily. And this is seen as problematic, especially when it's combined with excessive alcohol consumption. This is seen as quite a risky type of occasion on all kinds of levels. But one of the interesting things about Carnage UK is it's managed to take a very novel approach to promotions. That is, it doesn't actually advertise itself at all. The image that you see in front of you here is an example of user-generated content. These are images which are taken by students themselves and uploaded to a Carnage Facebook page. And so, in a sense, if you look at something like this, it's a perfect advertisement for drinking. Firstly, it doesn't really feature any drinking. I think the woman in the center you can see is holding a drink, but the thing that you see here is not an image of drinking, but an image of people clubbing and having a good time. So this is the perfect kind of advertisement as described by Lice, Klein and Jarley, an advertisement in which the product itself disappears. And of course, it isn't an advertisement at all. It's something which is uploaded by user-generated content. And this is the example of the sort of very, it doesn't look very sophisticated, but in a sense, it's a very sophisticated media message, which is very, very difficult to regulate. Because what we have here is a positive, is we know that to see this as a promotion of excessive drinking, one needs to make a number of inferential leaps. One needs to recognize that this is a promotion for an events evening where drinking is involved, but it isn't mentioning any particular spirits. So it isn't promoting any particular product, but it is kind of glamorizing a lifestyle in which drinking, and quite often heavy drinking, is associated. So why is this a problem? Well, let's go through a bit of evidence. Firstly, one of the things is over the last decade or so, the evidence about the alcohol risks involved the health risks involved with alcohol has become sharper and far more focused. So the World Health Organization has determined that alcohol consumption is a global health problem. It's something that especially targets, as we say, vulnerable populations. It's alcohol illnesses are particularly directed amongst poorer areas of society quite often. And we also know from our own colleagues. So this is the second quote here is from a research project led by Monash's Kerry O'Brien from the Behavioural Studies Unit, where O'Brien and his colleagues did research concerning the relationship between, or the prevalence rather, of alcohol advertising during Australian sports games. Their finding being that alcohol advertising, which is normally banned during the day, is allowed during sports and is therefore exposing countless millions of young Australians to positive messages about drinking, and that this is connected to the early initiation of consuming alcohol, which is hugely detrimental to people's health. Now, why is it hard to do anything about a promotion like Carnage? Well, to do that, and this is drawing a little bit from my own research, I did some research on consumer complaints directed at Ofcom. So now we're talking about the Office of Communication, which Livingston and Lunt were writing for. And to cope with advertising, what Ofcom has done is they've instituted a consumer complaint system, one in which if you see something that you're offended by, you can write to them. And interestingly, Ofcom are obliged to pursue and investigate any complaint, no matter how outlandish or trivial it might be. Now, that sounds like a good thing, except there are several things. If you look over the complaints that it's received and has dealt with regarding alcohol advertising, what you will see in that database is a few things. Firstly, it's a very time-consuming process for both the regulator and consumers. Secondly, alcohol companies will go to great lengths to defend themselves against complaints. And one of the reasons why they will do this is that most of the time, alcohol advertising doesn't involve a direct call to action. Alcohol advertising never says, go out and drink this, it'll make you sexier or make you more attractive or make you happier. It just never says that. So it's very often what you have are time-consuming arguments about the implications of messages that don't have a clear call to action. And finally, the idea is that policy imagines the wrong people. What do I mean by this is, well, it kind of imagines that people are able to, are highly read in media theory and media studies, for example. So, for example, if you kind of look at the things that people complain about, concerning alcohol advertising, it's mostly about fairly simple objections, such as this ad could appeal to children, or this ad could see children, could reach children. When in fact there are a range of other things that we could talk about how alcohol advertising naturalizes drinking. So the way that the complaint system is set up actually makes it really difficult to take concerted action against something like alcohol advertising, because alcohol advertising by its nature never tells anyone to drink. And secondly, even if it did, it's actually a really time-consuming and effort to make action. And that's all the more so given that it relies on consumers, the people who have the least amount of time and probably the least amount of knowledge about how media work, to initiate action. So it's kind of an upside-down process. And so that's one of the reasons why the issue of alcohol advertising in particular is a good example to talk about some of the problems and challenges in rolling out practical media policy that genuinely gives people an effective voice.